is even worse than I thought. Federal air marshals are sounding the alarm, claiming the Biden administration is forcing them to spy on and track Americans for political reasons, including people involved with January 6th as domestic terrorists. Even worse, marshals may be coordinating with China. Joining me now is the Air Marshal National Council Executive Director, Sonya Labosco. Sonya, thanks for your time. I spoke to you on my radio show this week, and I have to tell you, you really were shocking, some of the information you got out there. Are air marshals being used to spy on Americans for political reasons?
Yes, they are, Dan. It's unfortunate that we have to report that, but we've been trying to get the agency to stop this for the last 2 years, since January the 11th, 2021. This has been occurring, and we just need some help from the American people to say this is wrong and unconstitutional, and it needs to stop.
Now, I'm not going to get too far into the interview. Hold on. I wanted to press pause. I'm not going to get too far into the interview, people, because we have Sonya Labosco on right now. And my goodness, let me just take the screen out here. I'm going to close this down. My goodness. Wait, no, Sonya, I don't want to have you in here. It's supposed to be solo. Sorry, I'm getting used to Rumble, people. I got to figure out a way to have. I'm taking notes as to what improvements Rumble's going to have to make, because thus far I've noticed something else different that I cannot have if there's a guest in the backdrop. It doesn't seem, and it's probably me being a boomer, I can't have only the share screen video without having the guest be in the bottom instead of me. So good afternoon, East Coast. Good morning, what's left of it, West Coast, and good evening, whoever's watching from overseas. So we have on Sonya Labosco today, and it's going to be incredibly insightful. I don't know who tipped me off to this originally, where they said, dude, you got to cover the woman who's talking about a 9-month-old that found his way or her way. I don't know what sex the kid is. I think it's a boy who found his way onto the terror watch list. And I was like, oh, okay, fine. I get in touch with Sonya Labosco. I say, can you send me some stuff so I can do my homework? She sends me some stuff. I was like, oh, crap. I know exactly where this is going. It's nuts. What I love is that long format, long discussion. I'm going to get more than a 3 to 5 minute hit or a 3 to 5 minute piece on Fox News, because I got questions like, oh, we're starting from the beginning. But let's start from the very, very beginning. We should be live on Rumble. Let me go check. Looking good. We're live on Rumble. We should be live on Locals, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. I've got questions coming from them that we're going to ask. We're live on vivabarneslaw.locals.com. We are live on YouTube. Let me see. We're good. And now let me just see one other thing. We should be live on Twitter, formerly known as X. I'm sorry, it's X. Formerly Twitter, known as X, whatever. We are live across the interwebs, people. And I don't want to waste too much time because I only have Sonya until, let's say, 2 o'clock max, but we're going to get through all of this before then. So what happens is I'm not going to kill this stream on YouTube and the other platforms until after the interview, because it's going to be a relatively shorter interview. We are going to go to Rumble afterwards and then to Locals after that to talk about some other news. Ordinarily, I told Sonya before we get started, I'd end with her, we'd talk and say, yeah, I'm going to stay live afterwards. So when Sonya checks out, we're going to go to the other platforms, end on CommieTube, and go over to Rumble and then Locals. And that should be it. From now, let's see here. We got Natalie McClendon in the house, and I can pull up all of the comments from YouTube and Rumble. It says, Dog Digger says we're on refresh. Hit refresh. The video should be live on Rumble right now, and I'm sure it is. And I'm going to unpin this comment. Okay. With that said, everybody, I'm Viva Fry. If you don't know who I am, Viva Fry, former Montreal litigator turned current Florida Rumbler. David Freiheit is my real name. People out there think that they're like pulling an own on me. Like, it's not Viva, it's David Freiheit. Go find. Dudes, I ran for federal office in Canada. I don't hide my real name. I actually love my real name. Freiheit is German for freedom. Okay. That's it. Intro done. Sonya, I'm bringing you in now. And one of these days, and it's going to be today, I'm going to figure out how to change the names in here. I don't know if you do it on your end, but we'll get clear on that. We're going to tinker with some things on Rumble Studio. But setting all that aside, thank you for coming on. We're going down a rabbit hole here that might leave people genuinely terrified, but at the very least, they'll know what to do in order to raise awareness and advocacy. But before we even get started, 30,000-foot overview. Who are you?
Well, David, thank you so much for having me and hosting the Air Marshal National Council. I am a retired supervisory federal air marshal that was based out of the Orlando field office. I joined the Federal Air Marshal Service shortly after 9/11. We all know what happened that fateful day when 2,977 people were murdered. I actually witnessed that as well when I was coming home from a midnight shift as a Daytona Beach police officer. I turned on the TV that morning before I went to get some shut-eye and saw that, 4 planes were taken in a matter of seconds. And I raised my hand to join the team to fly undercover on aircraft after that to ensure that we could thwart another 9/11. So in short, I'm a patriot. I'm someone that believes in protecting others. I've always been called to service, and it's unfortunate now that the Air Marshal's mission, as we knew it, is not alive and well anymore. As we knew it after 9/11, we were looking for terrorists, we were looking for hijackers, we were looking for people that wanted to do harm to our country. But as we're going to talk about today in your podcast, our mission has sorely been changed into nothing but a political witch hunt.
I told you beforehand, I'm not going to delve too much into childhood because that we only have so much time, but professional experience pre 9/11. What was your professional training? What did you do before 9/11? And then I got many, many more questions after 9/11.
Okay, prior to 9/11, I was a police officer in Daytona Beach. I was a midnight shift sergeant, and I worked on the mounted patrol for 5 years. So a lot of experience in crowd control, a lot of experience with hosting individuals that come to Daytona. We have race week, bike week, spring break, you name it. We're a plethora of people from all over the world that want to come and visit the world's most beautiful beach. So a lot of law enforcement experience, a lot of firearms experience, a lot of tactical assault experience. I worked as a hostage negotiator for Daytona for 12 years. Super proud of my work there. I never lost a hostage of all the situations I negotiated. Everybody came out safely and not one shot was fired. So I was super proud of my law enforcement background when I came to the Air Marshals and had a lot to bring to the table to ensure that we kept our American travelers safe and that nobody ever had to experience another hijacking while we were on watch.
Okay, that's amazing. I could delve into all of that pre 9/11 pre-discussion stuff. I think I could spend a couple hours on that, but we don't have that today. That's fascinating. Amazing. 9/11 happens. Am I an idiot, or did air marshals not exist pre 9/11?
Well, air marshals did exist pre 9/11. We actually started in 1961 JFK when there were a lot of hijackings, where people were doing they were trying to leave the country and they were hijacking aircraft. So in 1961, JFK actually established the program. In 1962, they had 18 volunteers that volunteered to be air marshals. They were called civil aviation specialists then. So in 1962, the first air marshals were sworn in then Bobby Kennedy's office to fly on aircraft, but we were only deployed on international aircraft. So in 60s and 70s and the 80s, it was only international missions that we were deployed on. What we learned about post 9/11 is the fact that, the hijackers took our domestic flights. They took flights that were domesticated here in the United States and they weaponized it. So after 9/11, our mission changed. So to answer that question, pre 9/11, there were 33 air marshals. Post 9/11, we hired thousands.
Sorry, say that again. How many pre 9/11?
33.
33 for all international flights everywhere.
Correct.
And
Correct.
an air marshal is literally an undercover cop, armed, I presume, who's on a plane to ensure safety.
Yes, we are armed. We dress like regular passengers. No one knows who we are. And we're stationed throughout the aircraft. We always travel in teams. We're never by ourselves. And we're stationed tactically throughout the aircraft in case someone tries to take over that aircraft and do what they did on 9/11.
Not to be it's not to be glib or anything, but I mean, what good is 33 air marshals? I mean, that's then if you go in teams of 2, that's 16 planes at any given point in time that are being marshaled. There are, I don't know what it was back pre 9/11, but as of today, at any point, like 1 million people up in the air. What use is 16 teams of 2?
Well, at the time, they flew in bigger teams of 2. They weren't just teams of 2. They were teams of 6 or 8. So you only had maybe 2 teams deployed at any given time. When JFK started the program, there were thousands. They had thousands after it started in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. But if you remember the hijackings to Cuba, there were a lot of hijackings for political reasons. But like any other program within the government, once the need dissipates, what do? They annihilate the entities. So they downsize the air marshal program, knowing well prior to 9/11, we were blinking red for an attack on our aviation. So they knew very well long before 9/11 that our aviation was a threat, and they chose not to pump our workforce up. Of course, they waited till a tragedy happened, and then they want to and try to save the day after something bad has occurred.
Not to point the fingers, but as of what year, what administration was it that the Air Marshal Service started getting underfunded or defunded?
Okay, that was in the late 80s and the early 90s. Of course, they said, well, we haven't had an attack, we haven't had a hijacking, and they said, let's quietly move these resources over to other federal law enforcement entities, and they slowly but surely did that.
Okay, that strikes me as being mildly idiotic, where the absence of incidents is an indication of the success of the program. Kind of like, well, you're taking antibiotics and the infection's gone away, so let's stop taking the antibiotics. Although that's not a good analogy, actually, because the system's supposed to operate on its own. Yeah, that might be an indication the system was working. Started defunding it quietly, and then it goes down to whatever, a few dozen pre 9/11. Then 9/11 happens. I'd say any indication whether or not it would have happened it obviously could not have happened to the scale it did. But 9/11 happens, and then it's G.W. Bush that comes up and says we should really re-implement the Air Marshal Service.
That's correct. I mean, you would have thought the government would have taken a clue in 1993 with the World Trade Center bombings, right? We know that the World Trade Center, that was a failed bombing in 1993 of the World Trade Center. So we knew then that the target was going to be the World Trade Center. We knew that. We knew that since 1993. Did we do anything for our aviation to help mitigate that threat? We did not.
Okay, that's incredible. So 9/11 happens, whether or not it's because of a total absence of air marshals, box cutters, and sharp objects and overtaking the cockpit. What's the response, and how many air marshals are hired and part of what policy, part of what program? Is this not part of it's all at the same time, not part of the Patriot Act specifically? Is this a totally separate program?
It's a totally separate program, but they run under the Patriot Act now for their surveillance of Americans, and we can get into that later.
Oh, yeah, we are.
But there's a lot to dig into there. But post 9/11, when they started hiring, we were the Transportation Security Administration, part of the FAA, Civil Aviation Specialists. They didn't call us air marshals then. We were Civil Aviation Specialists. After 9/11, when they started hiring them, we had about 350,000 applications for individuals that wanted to fly in the air marshals. Well, the agency says that number is classified, but on many, many times they've released it, over 4,000 individuals were hired. That doesn't mean that we have 4,000 today, but that was the goal back at that time, post 2001, was thousands of air marshals, and they hired us, and it was an incredible feat. We all were hired. I was hired in February of 2020 or 2002, and then went to RTG, New Mexico for training in June of 2002. And I tell you, it was a huge patriotic push to be able to go to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center with fellow patriots, and everybody knew that we were going to be on those planes undercover at 35,000 feet, and it was going to be our job to stop any type of terrorist threat against the aircraft. So it was really a beautiful moment in our country that I have not seen in a very, very long time.
Wow. It actually just blows my mind, because they dwindled down a program that maybe had been achieving some success. The absence of attack is an indication of success. Lord knows where they were, spending all that money that they were saving. 9/11 happens, and set aside what the official narrative versus whatever. One thing I think most people can agree on, many, many red flags were missed in terms of the attack itself. And, American citizens were left literally naked on planes, security-wise, because of an absence of air marshals, which probably easily could have thwarted any, if not all of them. After 350,000 applicants, they make 4,000 give or take hires. And so now people feel safe because you've got armed marshals. You just don't know who they are on airplanes for the next 22 years.
And we're doing this some of it's based on intelligence, some of it's random. We're going back and looking at the flights that were taken on 9/11. Those were long haul planes. Those were big aircraft with a lot of fuel. 12,000 gallons of fuel is a weapon of mass destruction. And I know a lot of people think when they think of an air marshal, we're just flying on a plane. But really, if you look at that, that's our deployment. We're on missions. We're deployed. We're strapped into that 12,000 gallon weapon of mass destruction to ensure everybody that's getting on that aircraft, from moms and babies and aunts and uncles that are going to family reunions or business or picnics or just going to visit family, that you land safely. So my job flying is much different from your job as a traveler.
It's incredible. Yeah, big planes, long distances, full tanks, and one-way first-class tickets. Nothing that in conjunction with pilots being trained in Florida to fly but not take off or land, and among another of other anomalies. And so for the next 2 decades, you have air marshals. They're officially police, or is it like a lower or a higher level than, to say, certified law enforcement?
Oh yes, we're all federal law enforcement officers. We have arrest powers. I mean, we are under a 5 USC code, so we do have, like any other federal law enforcement officer, we have the powers to take someone's freedom away. We absolutely do. We carry handcuffs with us. We use them sometimes. Sometimes we don't. But normally, if a situation happens on the aircraft, we have to work with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, because that is their territory. They are anything to do with the aviation is in the territory of the FBI. And if it's a lower level crime, like a lot of times we'll see an emotionally disturbed person or someone that's had too much alcohol to drink, that will be turned over once it's vetted to ensure there's no terroristic nature to that. It's turned over to the local police department.
Okay, very interesting. I forget now if the shoe bomber and the underwear bomber were 2 separate incidents. Were there air marshals on those planes? Do you remember?
They were not. There were no air marshals on those planes.
Okay. Okay, so 4,000 air marshals trained. We don't know how many are on planes at any given point in time. There's a bit of randomness to it, and there's a bit of reconnaissance where they're saying some planes or some flights might, for whatever the reason, have suspicious people on lists on them. There might be other reasons for which certain flights are identified in particular. We're going to get into this when it comes to the January 6ers, but it is the case that these air marshals identify suspects or targets and then get on the plane just because they happen to be on terror watch lists or whatever.
Yeah, that's correct. And we coordinate with other law enforcement entities. Like we do coordinate with the FBI on special missions. I remember when I used to deploy and I had a real, let's say a known suspected terrorist, not a January 6er as of today, because the domestic terrorist has changed. Our definition of domestic terrorist in America has changed from what I used to when I was deployed on missions and I was looking for real bad guys. We had a full briefing in a secured area where you had a packet on these individuals that were flying. So you really dug into it and you knew the background of why you were doing your mission and why this mattered and who those known persons' contacts were that may be on the plane with them. But all that changed after January the 6th, and that is no longer the case as far as our deployment and how in depth we know the individuals we're following.
Quad S as a security element has existed since when? And that's 4 S's so that someone goes through additional screening. How long has that been in place for?
Now that program, they've changed the name a couple of times. They'll go from Quiet Skies to Select D to Quad S. The government's really famous on that, David, with you being in law, in the law and being an attorney. You understand how the government will play a shell game with the American people, right? They'll take a bad program and just rename it to some high-speed name, and it's still the same program, right? Mm-hmm. You put a lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. This program, Quiet Skies, has been around before 2018. DHS OIG actually did an investigation on Quiet Skies in 2018, and that report was released in 2020. It said the program was an absolute failure. It had not produced one lead to terrorism through all the deployments that we did. And I want to say the dollar amount that was wasted was upward $400 million. That
doesn't strike me as being all that much anymore, given the hundreds of billions that are that are being siphoned to foreign countries. But yes, that's a monumental waste of money. The argument would be there were no other terror attacks since 9/11. The metric is, however, identifying, arresting any potential suspects. And when you pair that with the idea that there were incidents, but air marshals didn't identify them or weren't involved in the planes, it's just basically people sitting on planes and nothing's happening.
That's correct. I mean, there are things that we've gotten involved with behind the scenes I can't really talk about in open because some of those cases are classified. So there are things that we have done that are great within the Federal Air Marshal Service. What has happened to us because of Quiet Skies, and let's think about it. When your head watch group, DHS Office of Inspector General, when they come in and they do an investigation and they give you the recommendations and they tell you what's wrong with the program, TSA, the paper tiger that it is, and I'm going to call it a paper tiger because it looks good on paper, but in reality, actionables, it's lacking the ability to keep our country safe. It looks good to the American people. They hear all these high-speed selectee quad S's, quiet skies. And you think that's, wow, that's a high-speed program. But in reality, this is just an overreach and a push of TSA because they weren't held accountable in 2020 for what their wrongdoings were with this program. So you can see how that fast forward to January 6th, and because they weren't held accountable years ago, this is where the overreach came in. And if somebody had stepped in and told TSA, hey, you're overreaching in the surveillance program. What you're doing is not producing any results for terrorism, because number one, that's what we're supposed to be looking for, right? As air marshals, we're looking for people that should be wanting to take over an aircraft, but we're not looking for those people. That was no more than a trial and error part for TSA to see how far they could get in their overreach.
When did you stop actually being on a plane as a marshal?
2014. 2014.
Okay, and what is the I'm trying to find. I'm going to screw up the name now, but the National Marshal Council. Sorry, what does the council do specifically?
Okay, so the Air Marshal National Council, we're a professional association for current serving air marshals or retired air marshals. We have air marshals in our members that are in all 20 field offices across the nation. And when we started the council, our number one goal was to protect the air marshals, because the government has even on the outside, they have a broad overreach, but even to their employees, they don't treat their employees very well. So we started the Air Marshal National Council to make sure that our air marshals were covered if they got injured in the line of duty, that they understood how to file workers' comp claims, if they needed to medically retire, because a lot of health conditions, you fly 9 million miles, you've got a lot of health issues. You need to make sure that you're covered there. So we started the council for it's like an employee association for protection. But what we've morphed into since we've watched what's happened January 2021, we've morphed into this organization that's working for the American people and we're fighting the government for national security reasons to keep air marshals on the plane, to try to keep travelers safe. So our entire mission has morphed into this, protecting the American citizens and travelers from TSA not allowing the air marshals to do their job. So now we've taken on this big bite of the apple to try to say, no, we were hired and put in place to keep Americans safe. We're not doing that anymore.
How many air marshals are currently on planes now ensuring safety in the skies?
It's a very, very, very low number. Right now, we've probably got, just throwing out there, less than 25% of the entire workforce that's flying. Less than 25%. Okay. And of those that are flying, following January 6ers.
That's what I want to get into that in a second. Pre-January 6th, how would the air marshals go about identifying a potential threat? What would be the protocol in following them? Who would be getting these enhanced security screenings prior to boarding a flight?
Right, and those are determined in many different areas. Those are determined by Customs and Border Patrol, people that are coming in through the ports, right? People that are coming through international. There'll be terror leads for that, FBI leads that are branching out that we help. We also help Homeland Security investigations, the U.S. Marshals. I mean, we work with every law enforcement entity regarding people that are bad and want to hurt our nation. That's where we would get a full-fledged briefing from those other entities. And we're going to follow individuals. Sometimes we may follow them for the entire week that they travel. We have different teams of air marshals that will deploy at different missions because we don't want to disclose who we are. Can't have the same team of air marshals following the bad guys over and over. They're going to know who we are. So we work in conjunction with all 20 field offices. So if there's air marshal teams, let's say in Washington field office, they may follow the first leg of the trip and follow an individual that we're looking at on the first leg. And let's say there's a team of air marshals from Houston that's going to take the second leg of that trip and follow this individual to the second leg. So it's a very blended, it's a very fluid environment, and it's all based on intelligence. That's what we should be doing, right? We're not just going to throw a dart on the wall to see if it sticks. We should be using our small resources in a very controlled atmosphere to make sure we're following the people that want to do harm to our nation.
This is wild. So, I mean, it's literally as out of the movies as somebody has a suspect has a layover, they switch planes, and you guys make a change, and someone else tails him, gets on the plane, and is just casually tracking a potential threat.
Correct. That's what we do.
This is wild. Okay, now I guess we're going to get to January 6th because I thought you were going to answer there's no air marshals on planes anymore because we're going to get into air marshals apparently at the border to secure the border that the Biden administration is fighting Texas not to secure. I thought the answer was going to be 0, but now that I know the answer, you're down to the hype, whatever it is, 25% of the force, but they're all being directed to the January 6ers. All right, not all, but many. January 6th comes and goes and happens. How many of the people that went down, that flew, that attended, or that were in DC ended up being on a list of potential domestic terrorists?
Okay, so we had a whistleblower come forward January the 15th, 2021. He works in a incident coordination section in headquarters that said, "Hey, I've got to come forward and let you know," because it's part of the council. That's what we do. We have our network of individuals that are in the field bringing information to us. That every single person that flew into the National Capital Region from a specific date, could be January the 4th through January the 7th, that TSA created a manifest, and they gave that manifest, the entire manifest of everybody that flew into the region, they gave that entire manifest to the FBI. They didn't scrub the list for law enforcement, congressional individuals, anyone, even air marshals were on this list. So TSA gives the list to the FBI, but then they take it one step further. They take the same list and they ingest it into the national security database and deem every one of those individuals as a suspected domestic terrorist, which would be a category 102 on our deployment roster.
This is wild. And I guess I might not be able to fully appreciate the bureaucratic entities, TSA versus security versus air marshals. But so that's basically to say an unfathomable and unmanageable number of people are now on something of a watch list.
Well, that's right, David, but it's a self-licking ice cream cone. TSA can now go, and they've got these hundreds of thousands of people on this watch list that they can say, we're using all of our resources. Look what a great job we're doing, Congress. We need more money, just like we need more Border Patrol agents to process people down on the border, right? We don't need Border Patrol agents to enforce immigration laws. They want Border Patrol agents to process people faster. TSA is doing the exact same things with the January 6th list. It's a self-licking ice cream cone. They're going to run for years and decades saying, we need more money. Look at all the hard work we're doing. We've done hundreds of thousands of missions watching these domestic terrorists, and we just have to hire more air marshals now. It is an absolute disgrace what TSA is doing to the American people.
I'm going to have to go look up that expression, self-licking ice cream run. I've never heard it before, but I understand the concept. Okay. So basically now air marshals or TSA are surveilling, have on a list a number of people who have been identified as domestic threats potentially because of their participation or in fact non-participation in the events of January 6th. Do we know what number we're dealing with, roughly?
It's going to be hundreds of thousands of people, David.
And what percentage of the resources of the TSA, and we're going to go with the air marshals, are dedicated to following these identified threats or whatever? Like what percentage of the assets of the resources are being dedicated to following these people?
100%.
Okay,
that's our mission. We're on the border. We only have two things we do. We're on the border or we're following J6ers. And I don't even say J6ers lightly. I want to ping the people that were in the geographical area, because we say J6 and automatically someone thinks that someone did something wrong or went into the Capitol. That's not the case on the people that we're following. They were just in the area at the time. They've not been investigated. They didn't commit a crime. And we're talking about reporters. Taylor Hansen, that was one of the conservative reporters that guy has been tracked 20, 30 times throughout his career since, he filmed the tragic death of Ashley Babbitt that day at the Capitol. He's not been charged with a crime, but he's got air marshals.
I'm trying to make sure I understand it. You say 100% is either to the border, we'll get there in a second, or to January 6ers. I'm not being glib or flippant. There are obviously other risks on planes. I mean, the traditional terrorists. Is that to say they're not focusing on any other potential threats? And I'm like specifically only Jan 6 and not looking at anything else.
If they are, there's no air marshals that I know that are doing those duties.
I'm
marshals in all 20 offices, and I talk to them every day.
Did you see the picture that Dave Rubin put up on Twitter the other day? I'm going to see if we can bring this up here. How does this work when there's two of us? Presentation. I know you can see this. Have you seen this?
Oh, yes, David. That's for the CBP Mobile One. That's where people from Venezuela, Honduras, and other countries can go online in their country and book to enter our country through a mobile CBP One app. And then when they get to this country, they're giving a written hand notice to appear based on the information they provide to the Border Patrol. And they're given a piece of paper that now they can go to the airport and get in a special line with no identification, and they can get on the aircraft before you. You're going to be patted down. You're going to be searched. They're going to go through a special security line that you're not allowed to go through because you're an American citizen and you have to show a real ID.
And air marshals dedicated to surveilling these people. Not that everybody from abroad is a potential. Well, everyone is a potential criminal. Zero. So this is like, okay, Ruben was like, Ruben puts up that post. It goes viral. He ends up, talking about it on Fox News. It's something that is there in plain view that nobody knew about until he put it on blast.
And TSA is proud of that. And let's talk about who's responsible. That's David Pekoski. He's the TSA administrator. He and Mayorkas both, they are working hand in hand to destroy this country. They're destroying this country. They're allowing individuals that have not been vetted. We don't even know their real name, right? You were an attorney. Can you imagine showing up to court with a client that you don't even know? Oh, hey, what's your name? Hey, let me give it to you on a bar napkin. This is my name.
So I'm Canadian. I can't imagine voting without 2 pieces of ID. So there's a lot of things that are surprising here, but it's mind blowing. Like when Ruben put it up, some people thought it was a joke. Others, it exploded because people just don't know. Wild. Okay, so the air marshals are dedicated to following January 6ers. Please explain to the general public who probably doesn't understand this, has never heard this before. I interviewed Brandon Strzok. He talks about how whenever he goes now, bam, like multiple.
One, that's no doubt. Brandon's had a really rough time, through everything that he has gone through. My heart goes out to him. I have a lot of empathy for him that he has been sucked into this vortex of this political nightmare that he's been pulled into.
And I interviewed. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Brandon's one. He's definitely gone through, and he's even testified in Capitol Hill regarding what has happened to him being on the Quad S list.
The other one I had was Alfredo Luna. I think it's Alpha Warrior. He's a veteran, former law enforcement. Whenever he flies now, bam. I want to say Lectern guy Adam Johnson. Is it Andrew or Adam Johnson? I always get mixed up. But a Lectern guy, I believe, also gets the treatment. So what does following the January 6ers entail for marshals whose job it is to secure the skies?
Okay, so what we would do on a detail, if we're deployed, we're gonna get electronic notification on our phone or on our work computer. We're gonna be able to see a photograph of this individual or whoever that individual is traveling with. Air marshals are gonna be assigned. We're gonna get a phone call from Mission Operations Center and saying, this is your new mission. You're gonna be, let's say, I'm just gonna use a scenario out there. Let's say Tampa Airport, right? Someone's flying from the Tampa Airport. We would have a minimum of 3 air marshals in the Tampa airport waiting for that individual to show up. If that individual is on a standby list, and let's say there's 3 potential flights that person could take, we're going to have 9 air marshals standing by because we have to have 3 per flight per leg. So if there's a potential that person could roll the dice and be on a later flight, we have to have air marshals prepared to go on the 2nd and the 3rd mission if necessary.
If I may interrupt you there, the individuals do not know that they're being tailed by air marshals.
Well, I think some of them, once now they're starting to understand what Quad S means. And I think now that they're starting to get the fact that they're being watched by, people, and people are coming up to them, asking them questions. They're peering over their shoulder. They're trying to look to see who they're texting on their phone. They're trying to document what type of computer, what type of device they're using. I mean, every time that we do these missions, we have to do what's called an after action report. So the air marshal team will actually document the individual, what they saw, what they were doing, who they were traveling with. They'll try to get photographs of them if they can, any type of, information they can to upload to these after action reports. But they will try to gather intelligence from you by talking to you as well. So some people are tuned in, others have no idea.
We're going to get to this in terms of now this looks like not just surveillance, but it looks like surveillance, but spying and not just ensuring the safety of the skies. So the immense waste of resources is patently obvious, directed at people who I think everyone, even the most staunch, vote blue, no matter who Democrat would say, are not actual domestic threats in the way that air marshals are supposed to be protecting the skies. Virtually all of the resources directed at just following these people. They fly, mobilize a team, tail them. And from what you're explaining, it sounds like very Soviet level spying on them as well, listening to their conversations, picking up details. And then you write after action reports that will detail all of this and expand any investigation into this guy and whomever he or she is in contact with.
Yes, and we will do this. We will follow people 20, 30, 40, 50 times. This is not once or twice or 3 or 4 times. We're talking years. We've been doing this since January the 6th. Years we're following the same people.
I mean, this is outrageous, and I'm not trying to be bombastic. It's ridiculous. If it were a legit threat, like just say Al Qaeda, if you have members of Al Qaeda or people who are on international terror watch lists, it would make sense. This is purely political.
It is one, David. It's one, and that's what's so disgusting and sad about it. We've taken our eye off the prize of the people that really do want to harm our nation. I mean, an 85-year-old grandmother in a walker. She can't even get up the aisle. You think she's going to take an aircraft? She thinks she's going to take an aircraft over? But we're following elderly people. We're following paraplegics. We're following 2-month-old babies. This is what we're doing in our country. And this is why we have to step in with the Air Marshal National Council and expose this story, because people died on 9/11. It's a very serious issue. And now we've got this political, the swamp, who wants to swing a pendulum toward supporters of another political party or someone that may think differently from you. And now you're going to be targeted. There is a huge push here in the United States to take your freedoms away. And TSA is helping do that. As we speak today, people are being followed that were in the National Capital Region on January the 6th. As we're speaking.
No, and I'm trying to make a little bit of a joke, like I watched Breaking Bad, Hector Salamanca. It's not because someone's a paraplegic that they can't, blow things up, bada bing, bada boom. But it's a sick joke because, I mean, none of these people, if you ask anybody, would be who you think you'd need protection from on an airplane. Diverting the resources from just more broad security screening is another issue. But when I ask, this is like political and they're spying on these individuals and gathering information, do we know if the powers that be are doing anything more nefarious with the information that they've been gathering for the last few years?
We don't know if they're doing anything more nefarious than that. I know that once you're put on that national security database within TSA, like if you are on this list as a 102, a suspected domestic terrorist, if you get pulled over by local law enforcement, your profile is going to pull up on your driver's license picture that you're a domestic terrorist. So the overreach is everywhere in your life that you may not even realize that. When somebody pulls you over, I've had this happen to a couple of people they've called, and the officer treated them really horribly. And they're like, I've never even had a speeding ticket, but yet their profile is going to pull up and they're a suspected 102. What would any law enforcement officer think if they pulled their computer open and they ran somebody's driver's license and it pops up as a domestic terrorist? I mean, you're going to toast right then and there, right? No matter what. You may have made a right, or maybe you ran a red light, or maybe there was something you could have talked to the officer. You're going to be toast at that moment. You're not going to have credibility. You're done.
Well, and also I would imagine it could conceively lead to unnecessary escalations in law enforcement, where a policeman will be much more apprehensive when dealing with someone who flags up as a domestic terrorist. So for those who are on the watch list as a result of their participation or even proximate participation in January 6th, they're labeled as domestic terrorists.
That's correct. They're labeled as a 102, a suspected domestic terrorist. It spells that out clearly in our deployment missions, on the missions that we get to deploy. It spells it out exactly who they are.
Holy effing S. I'm trying not to swear. You're a new guest, and I don't want to be too foul-mouthed. Holy sweet merciful hell. How do the air marshals feel about this?
A lot of them have left and retired. Many of them have left. They said, I'm not going to do this. A lot of them know that they'll be fired if they refuse an order. A lot of them really don't want to do this, and they have volunteered to go down to the border so they can not have to follow American citizens. It doesn't feel right. We were brought over after 9/11 for a patriotic reason. We all trained together in Ortiz, New Mexico. There were thousands of us. We know each other. This is not the mission that we were hired to do.
When you say that, may I ask the totally crass question? What's like a typical salary for an air marshal?
It varies anywhere from 75,000 to 125,000. There was a big pay bump they just received a couple of months ago. And I won't say that that's hush money. I mean, they deserve to get pay raises. They haven't had pay raises in, 15 years, many of them. But it's almost like TSA is going, hey guys, we know what we're doing is not right, but we're going to give you a pay raise.
Well,
Let's get into the fold with a little bit of extra cash.
And to me, I was just describing how you get this ideological capture of the court system, you get an ideological capture of the police system, and then you get an ideological capture of the marshal system, where you'll get the good ones to resign, and you'll get the ones who want to spy on January 6ers to apply and get the jobs. And you've weaponized this entire thing to be basically a spy apparatus of the politicized Biden administration.
It is something I never thought I would witness in my time on this earth. Honestly, I never thought that I would see these type of tactics being used against the American people ever. Even law enforcement in Daytona Beach, to being a federal air marshal till now, it is absolutely shocking what we have uncovered and what's continuing to happen. Now, this should be a nonpartisan issue, right? It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on in Congress, Republican or Democrat. You should not want your constituents being spied on. Period. Doesn't matter. But right now, because we have the Biden administration in office and we have those uniparty parts in Congress that are supporting this and not doing anything about it, it should be outrageous to every American traveler that this could happen to you or your 2-month-old daughter or your 5-month-old child or a 5-year-old child or a 17-year-old female cheerleader that's on the list right now. We're following a 17-year-old cheerleader around because she happened to be at a cheer competition during January the 6th and was nowhere near the Capitol, and her parents don't know. Her parents don't know we're following her.
It's mind-blowingly absurd. It's unfathomable. I mean, it's almost too ridiculous to believe. And then you get into the absurd situations of the 9-month-old kid. You sent me the link, and one can understand. Yeah, a 9-month-old kid is on the terror watch list, but presumably because his father attended January 6th. So this is like the one step. That kid's traveling with the father.
Well, right. And then, and it's 2 months. The baby's only 2 months old. It's a 2-month-old baby. It's probably 3 months old now. Wasn't even conceived on January 2021. Think about that. The baby wasn't even a thought at the time. Think about it. Now, when the baby flies, because the baby's name's been put in the computer, it doesn't matter if it's with the grandparents. It doesn't matter if the aunt or the uncle. The baby doesn't have to travel with the father. The baby's information is in the system now. So whoever travels with the baby, the mother who wasn't there, the grandparents that weren't there, are going to have those quad S's on their boarding pass. This is going to be something that affects that family for years to come. And once you get on this list, it's 7 years. It's a 7-year process unless you try to do something yourself to get off of it.
Oh my goodness. Okay, you're going to tell me if I've forgotten to ask anything about this, because it's abundantly clear it's not serving any other purpose other than administrative state spying on political adversaries, period. When I ask, if they've done anything else more nefarious with the information they've gathered, okay, fine. When you get pulled over, that comes up and it'll severely alter the way law enforcement will interact with you. Have there been any stories of people who are on this list being mysteriously audited, being mysteriously investigated by their professional orders? Anything along those lines that you know of?
Oh, let me tell you about this one story. We have an air marshal who was an operations officer, been in the government now 28 plus years. He is one of the air marshals that assigns missions. He deploys the air marshals on these missions. He picks the 3 air marshals and see who's in the area and what days work and what the hours are. So he assigns the mission. So he comes to work, opens his computer, and lo and behold, the first mission he sees, it's his wife. His wife is a suspected domestic terrorist because she went to the ellipse. He opens the computer. Imagine the hysteria. He's like, wait a minute, that's my wife. My wife was at the ellipse. She never went to the Capitol. But she's listed in the system as a domestic terrorist who entered the Capitol. It said she entered into the Capitol on January the 6th. Now, that's an absolute lie. But it didn't matter. They put it in the database anyway to get her rated as a domestic terrorist. So he goes to his boss immediately, the special agent in charge. His name is Bill Arperly, who, by the way, has been promoted to an assistant administrator at TSA. Just imagine how that magic wand happens. When you do the wrong thing, you get promoted. So he goes to Arperly and he says, This is a mistake. My wife should not be on this list. And Opperly goes, oh, it's okay. You just got to let it play out. You can't say anything. You can't tell your wife she's on the list. You have to assign the air marshals to follow your wife, but you can't say anything to her. So after work hours, you can't tell your wife that she's on this list. You have to keep that quiet. And he's like, but I have a top secret clearance. Like, how is this going to affect my top secret clearance when I go in to get my clearance renewed? I'm going to have to disclose that I'm living with the suspected domestic terrorist, right? Because if we all thought about a true insider threat, this would be a true insider threat situation if this was brought forward. The proper thing would have been to have done an administrative inquiry to ensure that there was no insider threat, but that didn't happen. None of that happened. He was told to keep quiet about it. So he assigns the air marshals. Air marshals are following his wife. Now, they followed her over and over and over. The story gets crazier. So he's an air marshal also. So during the holidays, he flew with her. They traveled for family reasons.
Stop. He's flying with her, so he knows there are air marshals following him.
He's armed, right? Not only does he know it, as their flight gets delayed and they have to move gates, the team of air marshals that's flying them have to text an update on a mission report the status of the individuals they're following. So he's getting those reports because he's the ops officer. So he's getting the updates from the air marshals who are watching him, talking about the gates that they move to and what clothes they're wearing. And it's him and his wife. So he's seeing the live updates about them talking about him. But another really interesting part of this story, as an air marshal, you have to do what we call a deconfliction with anybody that's armed on the plane. Because there's Secret Service agents, there's HSI, there's FBI, there's other armed individuals that we have to meet with prior to going on the aircraft to make sure that we don't have a blue on blue situation or somebody doesn't, try to take someone else's weapon. We know that everybody's a gun toter and they're supposed to be there. So he has to go to the gate and do a deconfliction and show identification to the other air marshals that he's the air marshal that they're following. So he's flying armed with the team of air marshals that are armed. So in reality, you had a bad guy, and he's sitting behind him, by the way, just to let you know how smart that was. So now he had to deconflict he's the bad guy that the guys are following. So now you've got a potential bad guy armed on an aircraft behind the air marshals on a mission. That's how crazy this is.
It's a Monty Python skit. I mean, this is an absolute Monty Python skit. I was going to say the only silver lining is they might thwart a terrorist attack just by virtue of dumb luck. Like, they'll be on a plane and, hey, we're here, but we were following the air marshal's wife. And I also thought part of the joke was going to be that she found herself on the list because she traveled unknowingly with someone else and they discovered an affair, which I suspect could also happen. Yeah, it's a ridiculous Monty Python skit. Okay. We got to get to the border situation as well. Why would air marshals be going to the southern border?
Well, at first we just thought that was incompetence. We thought, well, hey, they need resources. They're trying to backfill spots down on the border. But now we're truly in belief that this is done by design, that they actually want something to happen on the aircraft. We're taking a very small workforce. We talked about our numbers. We're not a very large workforce in the first place. And there's no way to backfill our duties in the aircraft. You can't just pull someone out of a normal, let's say, Homeland Security investigations. You can't just pull them out and put them in an aircraft because you have to practice a linear assault. You have to know that territory. Think about working in an aircraft. It's a very small tube. You have to think about your shot placement. You have to be a great shooter. By the way, you have to have some great skills. And you have to be super calm, because think about something going bad at 35,000 feet and you have to bring a firearm out to take care of that threat. So you can't just backfill these spots with other law enforcement. We don't have a capacity to surge in the aircraft. They started taking us down in 2021. So we've been fighting this for 3 years. But we believe that this is done by design. It's going to leave the aircraft open. It's going to leave our very valuable resources that we need. They're not going to be there for the American people. I mean, we've had some serious incidents happen on the aircraft. We had people try to breach the cockpit. We've had a flight attendant that was stabbed. We've had serious incidents. So it's not as if TSA doesn't know, David Pekoski doesn't know he is handcuffing the air marshals from stopping another 9/11. And it is his fault.
The incidents that have been serious are just general disturbances, nothing terrorist motivated. Do I ask the question? I'm a neurotic person. I'm not sure I want to know the answer. How impenetrable is the cockpit?
It's secured. I mean, and this is a thing that's different. Pre 9/11, the captains were told just open the cockpit door, just go with whatever they want. They're just going to try to take the aircraft and land it in a different country. You're supposed to do what the hijacker wants you to do. Post 9/11, that's not the case anymore. Those cockpits have been hardened, and they're not going to open the door. So if anything were to occur on an aircraft now, they're not going to open the door. So if they take hostages or something, God forbid, happens like it did on 9/11, they're instructed they won't open the door. And that's what's different now than what was different prior to 9/11 is they would have opened the door prior to that. And now they're not going to do that.
Now it's going to be a question of triggering something catastrophic behind the cockpit. And so what you say that the Marshal force is now 25% of what it was a few years ago?
Well, we don't know the exact number. Everyone that came on when I came on, they've hit their retirement age. They've hit mandatory 20. If you think about 2002, we stood the agency up with thousands. We're 2024. We're 22 years later. A lot of men and women have their time in. They're really sickened by what's happened in the last couple of years, and they've walked away. They've just said, I'm popping smoke. I'm out of here. This is not what I signed up to do after 9/11. So I say we have 25% flying. The other part of our workforce is either down on the border, handing out, water, and we're making sure that we're driving the illegals to the airport to be on the aircraft that we're not going to be on, and they can get to a special security line. So we're doing everything other than what we should be doing to protect our aviation domain.
So if I'm doing quick math, and I'm not a mathematician, but it's 25% of the force is currently on planes, all of whom basically are following Jan 6ers. The force itself is sort of dwindling or dilapidated. So you have 25% of a smaller force on planes focusing on absolute irrelevant, and I'll dare say it, basically irrelevant targets. And then another portion going down to the border, not to enforce and prevent illegal immigrants from entering, but to, did you say hand them water and instruct them to go where upon entry?
That's right. We're instructing them. We're taking them to the hospital to get stitches. We're going to make sure they get Band-Aids and that they get patched up if they've had any type of injury. So we're going to sit at the hospital 2, 3, 4 hours. You know what it's like trying to get care if you're in the emergency room, right? We know that that's not a quick process. You've got teams of air marshals. They don't travel alone. You've got teams of air marshals doing these duties. And we're told specifically before we get to the border, you're not a law enforcement officer. We don't need you. We need you for non-law enforcement functions, not law enforcement functions, non-law enforcement. So we're not even doing anything that would be considered of truly helping the Border Patrol.
Who is deploying the air marshals to the southern border? Whose decision is that?
TSA David Pekoski, the same guy that's his decision to deploy the air marshals to follow the J6ers. One guy. This one guy's doing it all.
I want to go quickly Google him. Say his name one more time.
It's David, David Pekoski, Pokoske.
David Pekoski, Air Marshal. Let me just see here. Oh, he's on Twitter. And who appointed David Pekoski? How long has he been there for?
Okay, so he was appointed first in 2019. He was appointed under Trump, and then he was reappointed, which is surprising, in September of 2022. So he's been reappointed for 5 more years, even after it was exposed that he was following the January 6ers in 2021. In July of 2021, we exposed to several congressional committees that he was following people illegally from January the 6th. But he was confirmed in the Senate, though. Listen, he was still confirmed in 2022, a year and
I get it. So how many votes does it take to confirm in the Senate? Is it a simple majority?
Like 60, I think. Is it 6? I believe it's 60. I think.
So bottom line, that is to say, there's a number of Republicans who voted for Pekoski, despite it being revealed that he was using the air marshals to follow January 6ers. That's
correct, and nobody's ever had a hearing on Pekoski yet as to why he's taking his entire workforce and putting them in a political vortex.
I mean, I'm going to try to steelman this. Is Pekoski going to come out and say that you are factually incorrect in your assessment and that we have 50% allocated to international terrorists?
He's going to lie because that's what he does best. He lies. Liar. His
now
nose will grow. Make sure you get a big screen on your show if you get him on here, because you're going to need that nose will grow as long as your screen will let it.
So you're the Air Marshal Council. What is now the interplay between the Air Marshal Council and the TSA by way of institutions?
It's not pretty. It's not pretty. We fight them every day, and we're going to, because they're doing the wrong thing. And yes, we're a small organization, but I'll tell you, we have a mighty big heart, and we've got some very dedicated patriots that we are not going to allow TSA to push this false narrative on people that we care about and we absolutely love. So if they think we're going anywhere, they got another thing coming. We're not going anywhere until this gets straightened out.
So you've raised the flag now. I've seen, you're doing the rounds trying to raise the awareness, because if I didn't know it, I presume that the average person didn't know it. That they've basically sicked the marshals on January 6th. I mean, I knew when I interviewed Strzok, I understand what he's saying. Like, okay, fine, you're on a list. The big profile names are on the list. That they basically, the next step is to turn this on parents who speak out at school board meetings because they're domestic terrorists. They'll end up on a no-fly list. I didn't appreciate the extent of it. And the idea that the TSA is deploying air marshals to the border, but not to secure the border, basically to chaperone illegal immigrants as they enter the country illegally.
It's horrible. They're not doing any type of duties down there. I mean, I've spoken, we get guys that are deployed and girls that are deployed now. And, we don't know what kind of situation that's going to put us in with what's going on in the state of Texas, right? You've got the federal government there pushing one end, and you've got Governor Abbott pushing the other end for the state. So, we're going to be in a very big debacle here in a short period of time, unless it gets figured out really quick. And I know that our aviation, we can't afford any mistakes, David. We have to be perfect with what we do with the resources we have. And I have to tell you, we're not even close to trying to find a way to thwart another 9/11.
So, and if I'll give the big takeaways, and then I'll ask you if I've missed anything. The big takeaways are that the air marshal as an institution, dwindling, dilapidated, and I'll dare say violently politicized, entirely or virtually entirely focused on what many people would agree is not an actual domestic terror threat in the skies, ignoring, or at the very least not looking into and paying attention to what most people would consider to be the actual risk for terrorism or violence in the skies, being deployed to the southern border to chaperone illegal immigrants, while also simultaneously putting infants, and not even conceived, maybe they were thoughts back in Jan 2021, but not even conceived, on the watch list, and wasting resources tracking 2 to 3 month old babies, which could involve upwards of however many air marshals.
And it's really sad. And one other point I want to put out, David, they're so desperate for air marshals now, they won't bring the air marshals off the border. They put a call to action to have retired air marshals come back, because they have no resources. Our resources are depleted. They just put this out 2 weeks ago within the air marshal, within TSA. They're trying to hire people back that retired 5, 8, 10 years ago, because they have no deep bench. We're not prepared, but they won't take the air marshals off the border. They have the resources if they would use the air marshals on the border back in aviation, but they won't do it. They're going to hold the line with Mayorkas down on the border. They don't care.
Has there been, petitions are not really worth the digital paper they're printed on, but have the air marshals signed anything of a petition to say, get us off the January 6ers and, let the peacocks fly, to quote the other guys? Has anybody vocally come out and said, this is ridiculous, get us off this duty?
Oh gosh, we have filed, listen, David, we've filed with the DHSOIG. We filed ethics complaints. We are working with congressional committee right now. I sent you a clip of Representative Clay Higgins on House Homeland. We've brought air marshals to testify in front of Congress. It is time for action to be taken and these individuals held accountable. I want to make this clear. This started with January 6th from a letter from Benny Thompson. Benny Thompson wrote a letter January the 11th, 2021. He wrote a letter to Pekoske, wanting Pekoske to disrupt the travel of white supremacists and domestic terrorists who were at the Capitol. Now, one letter got the entire agency, the lapdog got called out. The entire agency, Pekoske's his lapdog, called him out, and Pekoske turned this entire air marshal program into a political weapon. If one letter from Benny Thompson can start it, why can't one letter from somebody else stop it?
I think that's what November 2024 is going to be about. And everybody, Benny Thompson is Bennie Thompson, not to be confused with Benny Johnson, two very different people. For anybody who does a quick Google search and tries to pull up tweets or messages. Sonya, have I forgotten anything that I should have asked, did not know to ask, or something that you absolutely just want to make sure that people know before we leave?
Nope. I just want to let you know I've looked at a lot of the after action reports, and you know what people are reporting. The lady had on a pink Trump hat. She wore a red Trump hat. Oh, wait a minute. She had on a Trump T-shirt. That's the kind of things that are going in these after action reports, which I think is pretty glaring as to what the temperature is in the political arena right now.
It's political harassment, make travel impossible, ruin people's lives, impede the normal functioning. And I would also I would stand to guess that they gather information, and these people might be subjected to other forms of federal government harassment or whatever, audits, professional bodies investigating. Undoubtedly, I mean that would be my best guess. Where can people find you to follow the work that you're doing? And I'll put the links in the pinned comment when we're done.
Thank you so much. Well, you can go to airmarshalnc.com as our website. That's airmarshalnc.com. You can follow me at Labosco Sonya. It's my last name and my first name. Or you can follow us at airmarshals_AMNC on Twitter. And we appreciate all the help from the American people trying to get this out. At the end of the day, they matter more than any paper tiger TSA is trying to make it look like on paper. We're telling you, we need your help, and we need people to scream at the top of their lungs, because we don't want another 9/11. We don't want to see what our country went through that day again.
I'm good at screaming, Sonya, so I'll keep it on blast. And everybody watching now, snip, clip, and share the highlights, and I'll do the same thing. We'll keep in touch when there's news. If and when you'll come back on, please, to give updates.
Thank you so much, David. And just thank you for helping highlight this important issue. I appreciate it. And Aaron Freeman was the individual that reached out to you. So I want to tell Aaron, thank you so much for helping push this, brother, because that's what it takes. We have to keep pushing these important issues to the top.
Absolutely. And I mean, people sometimes think it's for lack of interest or some sort of like controlled opposition. There's too many things to keep track of. And so things happen organically. I got it's Freeman, not Friedman, in my DMs, and he made it happen. So congrats. That's it. All right. Ordinarily, I'd say we'd end and I'd say a proper goodbyes, but I'm going to continue talking about some stuff coming out of Canada. But Sonya, thank you very much. We'll be in touch and come back on whenever.
We'll see you later, David. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Now I want to see how I go kick from the studio. Does that do it? That's how it does it. Okay, and then I'm back in here. People, it's freaking wild. Oh, I forgot my jokes. I told her about my jokes beforehand. I said I was going to start the show off with either the scene from Bridesmaids with the air marshal or from Harold and Kumar Escape Guantanamo Bay. But whenever I put in movie clips, the streams get copy claimed, and I'm not interested in having to fight bullshit copy claims or make money for NBC, Universal, or whomever. What we're going to do now is we're going to go over to Rumble and Locals. So I'm going to end this stream on X. Let me see who's still watching on X. I'm going to end it on X, and we're going to go over to Rumble for some other stories and Locals, and then I'm going to end it on Rumble. We're going to go to Locals supporters only for a couple of stories and some after party. Let me just make sure that I know what I'm doing here. I see some notifications in the Twitter world. What do we got here? Okay, so we got some funny stuff. Okay, we're good. I'm checking some notifications. Everybody, get your butts on over to Rumble. I'll give the link to vivabarneslaw.locals.com in YouTube before we head out. Now I see some super chats in YouTube. Let me go back to the... Oh, this is a problem, by the way. The chat froze about a half an hour ago, so I let the team know because this has been happening, so they're going to fix this. But I'm going to go to the YouTubes and bring them up. We got a... Master Ball Rubius got a beautiful cat in his avatar. Great guest today, Viva. Thank you for bringing her on. It's amazing. I'm a little neurotic. Like, I got to make sure that, you know, the people who are coming on are not who they say they are, but are legit. Sonya's legit. I mean, I did my homework for the better part of the better part of the day. I was going to say the better part of the week. It's outrageous, and it highlights how, you know, hey, Biden and the Biden administration are now turning the air marshals into what Edgar Hoover turned the FBI into. It's amazing. An apparatus of the state for political harassment and political spying. The air marshals involved need to be thrown in jail for human smuggling. Oh, the border issue. Yeah, that's from Patriot Asylum, who's got the Punisher skull. Hold on. Oh, is that the... Hold on a second. That says Patriot. This was what I had on Alpha Warrior X. He's like, that skull they think, you know, is part of the 3%er. Or the movie The Punisher. You know, I can't bring up the chat so everybody can see it. Okay, so that is it. That ends the super chats. Get your butts on over to Rumble, where we're going to continue this party, and Twitter, YouTube. Hasta mañana. Come on over to Rumble or vivabarneslaw.locals.com, and I'm going to do this right now. Rumble and Locals